Welcome to Mental Healthy, the podcast where we share stories of the professionals and experts worldwide working in the mental health field. Here's your host, Dr. Kenyon Knapp.
Well, welcome everyone to the Mental Healthy Podcast. I'm glad to have you with us here today. I'm grateful to have my guest, Dr. Christopher Huseman.
Good morning.
Yeah, glad to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Now, I met you before, but a lot of the listeners haven't. So could you tell them a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I've been at Liberty University here residentially for 8 years.
Okay.
I'm a professor in the School of Business.
Okay.
My focus is marketing, digital marketing, and sales.
Okay.
And we originally from Illinois.
Okay.
So this has been a new venture for us. Well, like I said, for the past 8 years now. But it's funny because I still don't know all the streets here.
Mm-hmm.
Talk
Oh,
to me
that's
by
right.
restaurants for locations, not by streets.
There you go.
I can follow you.
That's the good stuff right there.
That's right. Yeah, I've been very blessed in the past from work experience, from Fortune 500 companies to owning several businesses of my own, multiple degrees, probably too many degrees to speak of. I'm a big proponent of certifications as a way for continuing education. So I am continually striving to learn. And, when problems or issues like we're going to talk about today come up, I like to dive into them.
Well, that's great. We appreciate it. And getting a different perspective, too. I mean, you being a business professor, a lot of the people in the program are more psychologists and stuff like that, but there's lots of applications of business to mental health topics, too.
Oh my gosh, completely. And that's why, like I've shared when I was presenting this beforehand, this is kind of a beginning of a journey for me. And so, my focus is really on, how do we encourage employees, what kind of support, et cetera, what are the effects? And so to bridge the gap between psychology, perhaps, mental health into the business, I welcome everybody. Let's get together. I feel like we've got a lot of silos that are still happening out there in the workplace, in our environment. Man, let's start sharing and make a better environment.
Absolutely. Well, a few weeks ago, those of you listening may not know, but we had the Mental Health Summit here on campus, and Dr. Huseman gave a great presentation. I heard a lot of good feedback.
Thank you.
And it was titled, Happy Employees Make Sense, How Social Psychological Influences Affect Employees' Happiness and Productivity. And so obviously there's all kinds of, we might call that industrial organizational psychology, but all kinds of applications of business to productivity and all that. And I know you have an interest in learning about employee happiness. And what led you to pursue that whole topic?
So, like I said, one of my focuses here at Liberty is teaching sales. I've been in sales myself for many, many years. Again, selling products for companies, selling my businesses, right?
Yeah.
From a services standpoint. And it was interesting. I was preparing for a conference in New Mexico, and I came across a stat, and the stat was salespeople are twice as likely to experience mental fatigue, burnout, et cetera, compared to other people in different industries. So that really got me thinking. Again, I thought immediately of my sales students.
Yeah.
Here I am. I'm getting ready to send them out into the world. I'm teaching them all the sales process and things like that. But am I really preparing them to be successful, knowing the extreme highs they're going to go through and the extreme lows they're going to go through, knowing all the frustrations they're going to encounter? And so that statistic just really shouted at me, quite honestly.
Yeah.
And so that was one that, for that particular conference, I said, that's it. I got to look into this more. I got to find out what's going on. And so one of the things that I did is I started looking at my current sales curriculum. We've got all the sales books from all the different vendors sitting there in front of me. And I'm looking, and I've got 7 or 8 different books laid out. Not one of them really dives into this topic of
A burnout?
Of a burnout,
Okay.
how to be mentally strong. I mean, they'll talk about emotional intelligence, right? Being able to, hear no, no, no.
Yeah.
But what happens? What does the salesperson need to do when they're at home, when they're thinking back about their day, et cetera? So they had great content out there, constantly on value creation and prospecting and communicating, but nothing within these realms of, mental health, if you will.
Yeah.
And so I was looking, there's, and again, they offered some glimpse, to be fair. They offered just tiny glimpse. They talk about how to think positive, perhaps, little snippets in a chapter. They talked about a little bit about, perhaps self-care, staying healthy, physically and stuff. But there's nothing. In fact, so then I started looking at this more, and there's other authors that have done and found similar research on this. And so I started exploring them. Well, what did they come up with? Like, surely this isn't something I've discovered. I never thought that. And so what other authors have also said, for example, little attention has been given to the salesperson's well-being in academics and in other books, quite honestly. Emotional exhaustion drastically affects job satisfaction. Okay, so I'm like, okay, cool. So this is something that's going on there. There were others. Abilities to keep mental ability sharp is vital to overcoming salesperson's challenges. So again, there's this gap basically that's been identified. And on that particular presentation, what I offered, without doing any formal research other than just looking at current literature, I offered, well, here are some possible areas that we need to get into, that we need to start developing curriculum for our students. So items, from self-esteem, from dealing with rejection on a continual basis. Again, further positive thing, not just positive thinking, but how do you sustain that? Right? How do you build that sustainable positive thinking? Because, when you get told no after a while, there's a lot of doubt that starts creeping in, right? If you don't have the discipline, there's a lot of doubt that starts creeping in. And so the things that I kept looking at really talked more about issues related to the mind. Right. And so when I think, and again, I'm not from psychology, I'm a fish out of water on this. I'm going to tell you that right now.
You're doing good.
When I think, and I kept seeing that recurring within the authors that have done this research, these are issues of the mind. And then so I'm thinking, okay, well, psychology, I know that enough, right? It must be psychology related. And then it's people interacting with others. So now there's this social psychology aspect that plays into it. And so then the more that I look into it, I'm like, okay, social psychological influences. What is that? How does that affect salespeople? Is there opportunity to explore this more? And I really wanted to look then deeper into this from a business standpoint. And so I had several questions I asked, like, do employees really need to be happy, to do a good job? Whose responsibility is it? And several others that we can talk about as well.
Yeah, and everything you're saying is making sense. Like, I do think about salespeople going out, and it's normal. Everyone gets rejected when you're selling anything. And how do you handle that? So it makes sense. Now, I know you mentioned there's some research out there about employee happiness and how that affects company profitability. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the research, that was one of the questions ultimately that I was looking to find. Does employee happiness contribute to profitability, results, et cetera? And quite honestly, I mean, the answer is yes.
Yeah.
That's the short of it, right? Thank you, good night, we're done.
Yeah.
But that's the short of it. And one book in particular was from Sean Aker back in 2010. And he looked at it's called The Happiness Advantage. And he mentioned on there he had 7 principles of positive psychology that affected work performance. One of them in particular was the happiness advantage. That when people have happy emotions, etc., it fuels them to do better. It causes increase in productivity and whatnot. And then there was also an aspect of social investment. And social investment talked about the strong relationship, if you will, between social support systems and their productivity. So now I'm thinking, okay, wait a second, we're on something, because most people, they don't work by themselves, right? They're not completely independent. And anybody that works in a place of business, there is other people working around them, either supporting them from underneath or up top, directing or offering them support. So I thought this was really interesting. But one thing that really got me pinpointed, I guess, or to put brackets around what I specifically wanted to look at. In his book, Sean Aker challenged management. And so he challenged management to prioritize employee happiness. And in that prioritization, he said, he argued basically that a positive work culture leads to greater productivity. It leads to longer employee happiness. It reduces turnover, and it just contributes to overall success. So I thought, okay, well, I don't want to just, hound on management. I
Yeah,
don't want to say
sure.
bosses are bad. That's not what I'm saying at all.
Yeah.
But when you think about people in the workplace, most of us answer to somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a great amount of influence then that comes with that, that directly either contributes to employee turnover or employee happiness. And so my quest in part really is, as I'm going forward, is how do we continue to recognize opportunities for that employee happiness from managers, perhaps? What can they be doing specifically? What are the effects of that? And so, again, I mentioned I'm a fish out of water in the psychology. The more I look into some of the different psychology realms of this, my gosh, I was saying, okay, well, this can be explored through so many different angles. Do we look at it from social identity, social exchange theory, against leadership, social psychology, and so I'm still kind of deciding which one is necessarily the best way to look at that. But I did settle on perhaps 4 or 5 questions that I really wanted to answer, and so those questions is. So again, do employees need to be happy to be productive? And I explore that. If employee happiness contributes to productivity, should companies strive to make their employees happy? Whose responsibility is it ultimately to influence these employees then? And then if it is managers that are responsible for this employee happiness, how can they do this? They've got managers and bosses. They've got all kinds of things on their mind. We're all adults. Why can't you just go and do your work?
Yeah.
I always I always looked at some of these professional athletes who are making millions.
Yeah.
Calling them crybabies. Why? But I tell you, the more I look into this, the more I understand why, even after making millions of dollars, they fail to perform, they don't thrive, etc. So that's one thing I looked at. And then, what are ultimately the effects of this? What ultimately are the effects of this in terms of profitability for companies? My business is or my background is in business.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of some of the lenses and questions that I wanted to explore this issue from.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. It's funny, the timing of this, because like you and I at work here, we're doing they call it the best Christian workplaces, and you folks out there don't see about it. This is more internal for us. But the whole university here at Liberty is doing this big study, and we do these surveys and all, and every year they study the best Christian workplaces and job satisfaction and what motivates people. And I know within my division, some people the survey said weren't feeling as recognized, for example, for the work they were doing well. So we then responded to that with a whole bunch of recognitions and awards and stuff like that. And then some people in the university talked about compensation was an issue. So now the university did a salary study, and compensation is improving in different areas. So it's like we're living this out while you're researching it too. But I'm curious. So you just mentioned those questions that you researched. What are some of the findings that you got with your research on this?
Yeah, so it's interesting. And again, some people have answered some of these, and then I asked questions myself. I did a nationwide survey of approximately 400 people, all 18 and over, working full time in the United States. Had a great representation across all. So it's interesting. I mean, some of the stats, that others have looked at already. They mention, like, specifically, do employees need to be happy at work? 50% of the workforce they mention is quiet quitting. Okay. So 50% of this workforce is saying, you know what, I've had enough. That's a big enough issue. Another resource mentioned that happy employees are 13% more productive than non-happy ones. Okay. So now 13% may not be, it may not sound like a lot, but if we're talking about a multi-million-dollar company.
Oh yeah, that's huge.
That can be a big payoff for sure. It was interesting. And then the Pew Research did a study, and they mentioned that one of the primary areas where employees derive meaning outside of their immediate family and friends is work.
Yeah,
We spend majority of our time there.
that's right.
So the level of importance that's been established here from a financial standpoint, and again, from where we spend all our time, is really leading to this culmination of understanding. If then employee happiness is influencing productivity, and one of the questions was, well, shouldn't companies work to make their employees happy? Well, and again, I looked at it from specifically a business lens on that question. And if you look back, there's many, many theories from Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith, way back in 1776 or so, to profitability theories, the Friedman Doctrine, where profitability is, ultimately one of the main things from a business standpoint that they strive to accomplish.
Yeah.
Now, even in not-for-profits, even in social entrepreneurship ventures, you've got to have income coming in.
Yep.
Regardless of whether you divvy that up from a profit standpoint at the end or not, you still have to have income coming in. And so, ultimately the answer is, yeah, companies should. They need that income to come in. If they don't, once they run out of the income or donors, right, their business is ceased. So, yes, that is definitely important from a business standpoint. Whose responsibility is it? I mentioned that Sean Anker already challenged management because of their position, their immediate influence. It was interesting. Other resources that have been out there, 95% employees feel that managers were the primary responsibility, held the primary responsibility to motivate them, to ensure their happiness. Again, other resources continually showed managers.
Yeah.
It was up to them to create an environment that fostered happiness.
So it's not necessarily the CEO or the president. It's more like the mid-level people. Is that
Well,
what you're saying?
It all starts from the top, quite
Oh, yeah.
honestly.
Yeah. Yeah.
It all starts from the top. More and more research continues to show that, again, that leader, when we talk about leadership in general, we say managers, we could say leaders.
Yeah.
It all cascades from the top.
That's true.
When, your second line leaders don't feel that from the highest echelon of leadership, they're not going to pass it on, right? It's going to be difficult for them to pass it on. It's going to take someone very unique, if they don't get that, to recognize the opportunity and pass it on for themselves, quite honestly. And so managers, again, continually get this. And then actually, if you remember, I think it was January, CTE had a conference, our Teaching Excellence Conference.
That's right.
And I was listening to, so this was after I was in New Mexico, and I was listening to a presentation from Dr. Stephen Krigler, I believe is how you say his name. I apologize if I messed that up. And he was talking about a study that he did specifically on teachers. And I mean, my ears were just ringing like crazy because I'm taking notes from what he was saying. And in that particular one, he said, teachers felt frustration for not being heard. They looked for opportunities to network with their colleagues. Culture was a major issue that led to burnout, et cetera. And they felt a total lack of support from the top down. Another big issue was communication. So, that got me thinking, well, that's interesting. He's looked at his study specifically from an education standpoint. What are people just in general across the spectrum of businesses across the U.S., how do they feel about that? And so that then led me to initiating my own study. Like I said, there was about 400 respondents, 18 and older, full-time, working full-time. I wanted to see whether there was something new or confirm what I've been reading to date. And so that's why I conducted my own study as well.
Oh, that sounds good. And talking about income, I need to thank my sponsors, and we're going to hear from them right now. Hey everyone, this is Dr. Knapp. I wanted to tell you about Empower Counseling PC. It's a Forest, Virginia-based counseling agency that serves clients in all areas of mental health with in-person therapy sessions or telehealth within the state of Virginia. With 27 counselors, a psychiatric nurse practitioner, and an eating disorder registered dietitian, their mission is to treat the whole person. They specialize in eating disorders, postpartum, play therapy, PTSD, substance abuse, infertility, grief, marital issues, and so much more. Please visit them at www.empowercounseling.info to learn more about their services and their compassionate team. Well, welcome back, everyone. But you were saying, though, you did this big survey with 400 respondents and everything. So tell me, how do employees feel today? What did your results show?
Yeah, so this has been interesting, and a lot of it was confirmation, quite honestly.
Okay.
And then now I literally just got the final results about 2 weeks ago, so I still need to go through all the data and run all the statistics on it. But I did put together some summary statistics, perhaps, on the questions that I thought perhaps would be interesting. So one of the questions that I asked was, and hopefully this will come out in a paper published at some point here in the near future, but how often does management personally motivate you in your current role?
Okay.
I thought, okay, it's a pretty good question. Now, overall, almost 28% said daily, which is great. Good job, managers. Good job, leaders, right?
Yeah.
Weekly, 28%. Another great job. Another option was, well, management motivates me a few times a year or never. Now, collectively, if we look at never was answered by almost 14% of the population, full-time, working full-time. And 14%, again, doesn't sound like much at all. And quite honestly, overall, it looks like a lot of people are feeling good about themselves in terms of happiness and managers doing their job and motivating. But look at it from a larger scale. 14% is representation of 18 million people out there that say, my manager never motivates me. 18 million people.
Yeah.
And if you think about the effects where we've got 18 million people out there that have never been motivated by those that they report to, that's huge.
Yeah.
You know, I was thinking, just looking at a comparison, educationdata.org mentioned that in the fall of 2024, we had roughly 19 million undergraduate students enrolled in a program. Can you imagine basically all of those students never being motivated on the individual level at all? Never, good job. Hey, your work was outstanding. Wow, you're going to do great things. That would be devastating, I would think.
I would think so too. I mean, we've both been around the block enough to probably know that, you know, the effects of working at different companies and all, and having different managers ourselves, it makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. It really does.
I mean, I think about some of the really good managers I've had over the years. They've created that environment you're talking about. And then I just, you know, got the spring in my step every day when I'm going into work and all that. And you just work harder.
Absolutely. You most definitely do. And it was interesting. So research currently, you know, that I looked at had said managers were the primary source, right, for this motivation. Another question that I asked was, in order of effectiveness, you know, 1 being most effective, 5 being not, what entity motivates you the most? And so we had management, recognition, rewards, the work environment, your colleagues and the team that you work with, or you know, personal growth and development. Unfortunately, one of the highest rated percentages for listed as a number 5, so being least effective, was management, almost 31%. So there's a lot of opportunity in that regard. In fact, you mentioned earlier recognition and rewards.
Yeah.
Recognition and rewards was listed as by 26%, so that was almost the highest aspect out there, as being the most indicator of what motivated people the most. So to your point, recognition and rewards. And it's interesting because management has that opportunity, first and foremost, to offer such and to communicate such. So one of the questions we asked, or that I asked, I say we because I tell you, my wife and family, they're such great supporters. I mean, I couldn't do this without them, so it's not just me. But when we said, how often do you feel motivated to do your best at work? Now, always, often, had some great percentages, almost 30%, 37% in some of these. 33.61% of the respondents indicated sometimes, rarely, or never. Sometimes, rarely, or never. Again, 33.61%. That equates to 45 million people that have indicated, right, statistically, that they sometimes, rarely, or never feel motivated to do their best work. Now, I've told you I've owned several businesses.
Yeah.
And when I have them, if you've got employees that they're just kind of in there and, you know, not really doing what they're supposed to be doing, etc. That speaks volumes to you.
Oh, yeah, it does.
And we've got that great of a percentage of people that say, sometimes, never.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of opportunity, right? We asked, how do you feel your contributions are valued by management? How often do you feel that they're valued? Sometimes, rarely, never. Guess what percentage that was collectively?
No idea.
45% of the people.
Wow.
45% said, how often do you feel your contributions are valued by your management? Sometimes, rarely, never. Again, it's a great opportunity.
It is.
We asked specifically about recognition and reward programs. How effective are the recognition and reward programs by your organization? There's that ineffective, very ineffective, and, well, let me say this. One of the options was, we don't have such programs.
Mm-hmm.
Almost 18% said that.
Wow.
There's no recognition, no rewards. They just don't have it. Between collectively ineffective, very ineffective, and we don't have such programs, 45% of the respondents answered that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sort of feeling convicted here as far as my management role at this university. I need to learn from this. But the research is great, and you've touched on this. But let's just say there's some manager people out there listening. Like, I know there's a number of people listening who have their own private practices and others work for them and stuff like that. What advice would you give them as far as how to increase the happiness in their employees, which will increase productivity?
Yeah, well, and again, so that's where some of these social psychological influences can come into play. You know, one of the questions was, well, how can management do better? Right?
Oh, yeah.
And if we just quickly, look at like a word cloud from all of those responses, one of the big things is communication. In fact, spoiler alert, it starts with communication.
Mm-hmm.
The foundation of all these other things that they can do is communication.
Mm-hmm.
They mentioned incentives, being honest, being transparent. And so, those are definitely some of the highlighted things. But specifically, what are some things that people can do? Again, research continually showed organizational transparency and organizational justice. Mm-hmm. So if we look at organizational transparency, why are these decisions made? How did you come about making this decision? Mm-hmm. I had a great boss one time, and he was so just open and authentic. Mm-hmm. He wouldn't tell you just to go do something. He would sell you on why it needed to be done. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's very easy to just say, look, go do this, don't ask questions. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yep.
And a good portion of people, unfortunately, that's their daily life. But to understand, look, these are the problems we're facing. This is why I need you to go do this. This is how it's going to contribute to our overall profitability, et cetera. Mm-hmm. Oh, my gosh, now you got buy-in.
Yeah.
And when you have buy-in with from your employees, and in fact they can contribute to that decision to a degree, right?
Yeah.
Now they have even more buy-in. Now they're invested in that direction.
Yeah.
And when they're invested in that direction, it's partly their idea, so they're going to see it out even more so than just being told what to do.
Yeah.
But that authenticity is really something that means a lot. And then from an organizational justice standpoint, a lot of the research pointed to workload. Mm-hmm. People want to be able to understand that their workload is the same as or similar to everyone else's workload. When you're asking one person to do everything, mm-hmm. It's no different. I come from a manufacturing background. It's no different than machines. If you're running one machine all the time and another machine half the time, that machine that's running all the time is going to burn out. It's going to mm-hmm. wear out much quicker. Mm-hmm. So, that's nothing new, quite honestly. Ethical leadership, just being ethical, doing the right thing. Don't lie to your employees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
again, some of these things are very basic, but research is showing that that's not always happening out there. Having clear goals. Mm-hmm. We talk about SMART goals all the time in business, but having clear goals as a department, as a division, people have to know what they're working for or working towards, mm-hmm. right? And then if you can share that goal and share that vision of why that goal is important and get employee buy-in, oh my gosh. Now it's just like sports. You got a whole team trying to get the ball across the goal line, for example. Mm-hmm. And it's not everybody working on individual goals and things of that nature. positive thinking, like we mentioned, this comes from a management standpoint. They have to model this. Managers, I've had experiences where, boy, the manager, this person was just burnt out. You could tell it.
Yeah.
Anything you asked, they would reply grumpily. They were always frustrated, and so we have to. I think once you step in that leadership role, you have to, in a sense, put on a good face, right? Not be. Now, I'm not saying put on a fake face.
Yeah.
But you have to be positive regardless of what you're going through towards your employees and for your employees. Make sure that they understand you are there for them, right, et cetera. And if you want to be in that authentic, perhaps you even let them know what you're struggling with, perhaps, because you're going to find collectively this is a team environment. The more we can support each other, the better productively we're going to be. But imagine, going back to recognition, even the littlest of things. We had a manager one time, they would constantly leave little notes, little awards. Hey, just want to say thanks for all you do. Didn't take anything. Took 5 minutes of their time. Right? But employees love that.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine winning an award, presenting at a conference, leading a team, and your company or your leader never mentions anything about it? Just never,
Yeah.
Imagine never being in an environment where your team never talked to each other. You never had a meeting. Now, sometimes you might say, hey, that'd be great. I don't want to have meetings.
That's right.
But imagine, right, and especially like in academics where everybody's got different schedules, imagine never having a meeting with your department.
So you'd feel disconnected.
Absolutely,
and all that.
completely disconnected.
Yeah.
Right, never knowing what people, what they're going through, what wins they've been able to accomplish, et cetera. It can drastically take away. So that's another real simple thing that leaders can have. Even if you just say, hey, can we all have a quick huddle here? Right?
Yeah.
Let's have a quick 15, 20-minute huddle.
Yeah.
I just want to check in with everybody perhaps. Or, hey, great job, June or Sally or Bob or whatever, right?
Yeah.
People want that. Research has indicated that they want that.
Yeah.
And then, just from a communication standpoint, again, I'm one that I feel silence in the workplace is a form of abuse. Now, again, I'm not a psychology major, but unfortunately, there's lived experiences that that transfer that thought process of when you never hear how you're doing, what's expected of you, or whatnot. People, like you said, they start guessing. What am I supposed to be doing? I wonder how they're feeling. Are they happy with what I'm doing or not? And so, and managers, again, from action points, you got to communicate to your team on a regular basis. Doesn't even if it's a quick text, hey, just say great job or something along those lines. It's not being done collectively from a manager standpoint. Now there was an aspect too where they talked about neuro-linguistic programming, specifically about listening. And this was interesting because we teach active listening in sales. I don't know that we've ever really gone into this is a neuro-linguistic programming aspect, but we teach that aspect. And so I think that that's another thing that managers need to focus on is, are you actively listening? I know you've got a ton going on, and you've got all kinds of reports to fill out and everything else that's going through your mind. But when you're in front of that employee, are you actively listening? And one of the ways that you active listening that we teach in sales, right? You start writing down. You write down a couple of things that's important to them. And like what I always do, if I learn someone's birthday, first thing I do, I put it in my phone, and I put it on repeat every year. There's no reason for anybody to forget someone's birthday. There's no reason really for managers to not know some important things that an employee has brought up and follow up with them, right? And so, I think it's interesting. And then, quite honestly, when you have that communication, when managers are constantly communicating, one of the things that research has continually showed, and in fact, this came from the book Happier, an older book, 2007. But I love the quote they had in there from Ralph Waldo Emerson. And the quote was, "To different minds, the same world is a hell and a heaven." And I thought, man, as I was reading that really spoke to me because the one aspect that research continually showed for leaders is just the ability to reframe how employees are thinking about something. So literally, again, when there's no communication, employees can sit there and they fester. They develop these things in their mind of, oh, I bet it was so and so. I bet it was this and blah blah blah. And managers or leaders can come along with just a 1-minute conversation, hear the frustration, and offer a unique perspective to help that employee reframe how they think about that. Stephen Covey had an awesome example of this reframing in 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And real quickly, he talked about, he was this man on a subway. And the man had worked all day. In fact, went in at 7, was riding home at 6, was exhausted, right? Just wanted to get on the subway and just kind of, decompress and not have to worry about anything. And he's sitting there, and he's doing just that. His eyes are closing. And at the next stop on the subway comes these kids, 4 different kids, just rowdy kids, like... the 2 brothers were twins. They're hitting each other in the arm. They're making all kinds of noise. The little Sally keeps dropping her doll and making a racket, and And then on comes the dad after them, just kind of looking downward and just real silent, and sits down. And as the subway pulls away, kids are climbing on everything. They keep knocking over the gentleman's briefcase. The dad is just sitting there, not doing anything. And of course, that gentleman, his tension is building and building and building and building.
Oh,
and he's just getting so upset. And so finally, he looks at the dad across the way. And he goes, "Sir, can you please control your children?" And the dad, he's sitting there, and he kind of looks up like, "Oh." I was like, what was he doing? He kind of looks up and says, "Oh, I'm sorry. I guess I didn't realize this. I'm so sorry I didn't realize. We just came from the hospital. Their mother died." In that instance, that gentleman, his mind has been completely reframed. What he thought was important, what he thought was purposeful negligence on the husband's part, it wasn't at all anymore. And that is the power that our leaders have. But they can't help employees reframe their mind if they're not communicating with them.
Makes sense.
So that's why the power of communication is so very important. It goes, in addition to communication, then it's constantly asking employees for feedback. Right? What do you think about this? What do you think about, again, getting employee buy-in, right? Is so easy. Now, it doesn't mean that the leader's always going to take the employee's words. Right? But leaders also can utilize that different perspective, right? To further enhance their solution that ultimately they decide to take, perhaps, or that they come up with. And then again, the last thing in that research is continually talking about the community building. You have to give opportunities for people to talk together. So meetings are important. Now, meetings don't have to be boring. I remember one time working for a Fortune 500 company. We were sitting there, and there was about 5 of us, and our manager at the time said, "Let's just talk about this over ice cream." Right? Yeah, let's do that.
Sounds good.
So
to
we
me,
leave the building, right? Get outside of the walls, go sit outside in the sun, eat some ice cream. You have to create some of those opportunities, again, for people to meet. And sometimes taking them out of the context of their normal day work and let people just see what people are like outside of the work environment. But creating that sense of community is huge for managers as well.
That makes sense. It's funny. Everything you're saying here, I'm going like, yeah, that makes sense. Like, it's like all the dots connect. And you're saying, if I'm hearing you right, that, having clear goals, good ethics, shared governance, you might not use those exact words, but balanced workload, sense of community, good communication, all these things lead to more happiness into the employees and then into more profitability for the company.
Exactly. Happier employees, greater productivity, greater profitability.
So everyone should be on board with this, like including the managers and the CEO or whatever, because it's more profit. What's preventing people from doing the most obvious things?
That's a great question. In fact, that's one of the areas that I want to look in further. In fact, when I was presenting this originally, I looked at future research considerations, and it's interesting because one of the things I want to look into is, well, are leaders not doing this? Because, are leaders not doing this because they're not measured on it?
Mm-hmm.
We know the statement in business is what gets measured gets managed.
Yep, true.
And so our leaders at the top echelon, are they getting feedback from the I don't want to say lower level, but the lower responsibility employees about their leaders on a regular basis?
Yep.
And if they're not, they're really missing out on a great opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is not my purpose is not gotcha, you're bad. This is something we can easily further develop.
Yeah.
So is it a matter where leaders aren't consciously doing this because they're not measured by it? And if that's the case, then maybe we need to start measuring them.
Mm-hmm.
But when we measure them, we've got to do it in a way where we're not pinpointing, employees to their answers, right? I mean, if when you're going to do a survey and you say it's anonymous, it really needs to be anonymous. Right?
Yes.
You can't have a link directly related to an employee's email address and ask them, what department do you work in? How long have you been there? But because we can trace that right back to that employee. There's a big aspect of that. One of the questions that I asked was, how much do you trust your managers? How freely can you speak your mind without fear of retribution? 25% say, I can't.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's true. And I've worked in environments like that over the years. I've worked for 7 different universities. And when that's the case, everything stops. Like there's no improvement because you don't feel safe.
Right.
Yeah. And even if the surveys are anonymous, if people don't believe that they're anonymous, then they're not going to respond honestly.
And I'll tell you, that's a cultural aspect, and you have to. I mean, you can't have a culture where there's no trust, and all of a sudden, you say, "Oh, we'll fill this out. And we're gonna,"
Yeah.
That takes time. Or perhaps what you need to do is say, "Hey, how about we form an employee group that conducts the surveys?"
Yeah.
Right. So that it just does not happen overnight, and that's why that culture, that trust. It is so very important.
Mm-hmm.
It takes time to build that.
Yep.
And just like anything, just like our personality, our how people know us, one little thing can destroy all that, as well. And so that's why I really just want to stress and come up with a way, perhaps, for managers and leaders to proactively develop themselves in a systematic way where it's just unconscious to the point they're always staying in touch with their employees. They're asking these questions. When they do that, we're going to have a much better workplace. And quite honestly, this is, again, that is not new. We find these instances throughout the Bible.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We're to encourage one another. We're to meet with one another. We're to lift each other up. We're to carry each other's burdens. This is not new information. I think it's a matter of behavior, right? And like I said, why isn't this constantly happening with managers is a great question and something that I want to continue to pursue. But I will also say, quite honestly, I don't think at the end of the day, if you're part of a team, that it should only be managers. You and I have a responsibility, regardless of our role, to live biblically with those commands, with what we've been charged to by our Creator. You don't have to be in a leadership role to start fostering and developing this in your immediate area. And so I don't want you to think I'm just beating up on managers or leaders.
No.
Like I said, I think this is a personal responsibility we could all take as well.
Yeah.
I think leadership is a verb.
Yeah.
Right? It's not a title.
That's right.
And we all have the power to be leaders in the circles that we operate within.
Yeah, you could be a leader or you could be a leader.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Oh, that's cool.
So there are plenty of opportunities, again, not only from here as I continue to go through the data, like I said, and I want to look at, okay, do 18 to 25-year-olds feel differently than 40 to 45-year-olds, et cetera. So that's all part of the data crunching that we still need to do. But I think that I think I'm on the right road.
Yeah, I think you are too. I mean, well, you got this big study done now. Are there some future directions of research on this that you want to delve into?
Yeah, so I think, again, I wanted to try to pinpoint this to see if it varies within different industries.
Okay.
Is there one industry that just is continually doing better than the other?
Yeah.
I mean, I will tell you, sales, while that's my wheelhouse and an immediate interest, there's a lot of opportunity there. I literally just had a phone call yesterday with a gentleman that I've known forever. He's been in sales for 10 years. Hey, I said, hello, how you doing? How you doing? The first thing he started talking about is just how, man, I'm just burnt out. I don't know. I need a coach. I don't know what to do. So the problem, even specifically within sales, is definitely there. I would imagine there's a problem in academics to some degree. I imagine that this apply. I mean, I know from just this study, it applies across all industries. So is there a specific industry maybe that we can pinpoint and say, look at that one, right? They are doing some things better than others, and now let's focus on those aspects and try to replicate those, perhaps.
Yeah, learn from the people that are doing it right.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. That's absolutely correct.
That makes sense.
And, and one thing that we, one of the last questions that we asked that I don't think we touched on yet is, so what are the effects on profitability, of employees?
Yeah.
Employee turnover, it was interesting. Just in a 100-person business, employee turnover research has showed it cost about $2.6 million per year. That's just with a 100-person employer. Disengaged employees, generally speaking, research has shown it's costing roughly $8.8 trillion. Disengaged employees. If you remember back to some of the stats I mentioned, as high as 45% of the people said, I'm not engaged.
Yeah.
Job stress equates to about $300 billion a year. Employee morale, low employee morale, is costing anywhere from $450 million to $550 million on an annual basis. So research is out there showing the negative effects of employee happiness not being a priority.
Yeah.
And so I'm hoping in part to try to change that.
Yeah. And improving that morale probably doesn't really cost the company $450 billion or whatever it is.
Oh, no.
It's probably much, much less, but you just have to make the effort.
Yeah. I mean, well, like you said, as we're talking, there's immediately things in your mind, right, that
absolutely.
I could go do. As I'm talking, I'm thinking, there's one or two people I want to reach out to as soon as we're done here because I haven't done that lately.
Yeah.
And again, it starts with communication. It's interesting. Like, I don't know if is it a matter of ego? Is it a matter of fear of rejection by leaders or managers? I don't know. I mean, that certainly is another area to explore of, again, why isn't this done on a regular basis?
Yeah. Well, that's a good point of challenge, and probably all of you out there listening go, yeah, I can think of how I can apply this in my setting, because this really does apply everywhere. It really does.
It does.
I mean, whether you're at a college or some business, or even if you're just a student somewhere, dreaming one day, I want to be a manager, I want to have a company or something. Yeah. It applies to all of us. So thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And once again, folks, Dr. Christopher Huseman, and do you have any publications or anything about this? I know you said you're about to publish your study. Any resources that you have that you recommend people to?
Well, the Happiness, again, is one book, and it's an oldie, but it's from 2007.
Sure.
Sean Akers' book, The Happiness Effect, that was from 2010.
Okay.
Now, I tell you what, I mean, if they want to read just in general about positive psychology, Norman Vincent Peale's book from 1955, I think, right?
Yep.
I read that when I was 10 years old, I think. And it was a godsend. I mean, I remember specific quotes from that, and it really has helped remind me, that we are created with a spirit, right, from our Creator. And my gosh, the sacrifice that has been made for us right now, like, do we have anything to complain about? Perhaps. And that book just helped really kind of refresh me on a daily basis, really just a mindset. I have to work on my mindset. I have to take control of it because, there's dark forces against us a lot. that are trying to steal our joy. And
Yep.
this is something that we have to continually replenish ourselves with. I love Zig Ziglar. If you can read anything from Zig Ziglar, he's I'm a big fan of his. Unfortunately, he's not with us anymore. But, he mentioned that people said, Zig, I don't know about this positive psychology stuff. It doesn't last. And he says, well, I know it doesn't. That's why we say it's a lot like bathing. We encourage you to do it every day, right? We have to continually renew our mind.
Yeah.
So literally those 3 books, and quite honestly, there's many, many others written just about happiness. But hopefully I can bring that into the workplace, and hopefully there will be many future publications. And if you want to help, I welcome it.
Well, we'll have to see what we can do.
That's right. Sounds good to me.
Great. Well, thank you again so much for being here. We appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today on the Mental Healthy Podcast. And we'll look forward to seeing you all next time. You all have a good day.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Mental Healthy. If you want to hear more episodes, please hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts and head to linktree.com/mentalhealthypodcast for all of our social media platforms with the latest mental healthy content. If you have a story to share that relates to what we discussed in in or any other episode, please contact us at mentalhealthy2020@gmail.com. That's mentalhealthy2020@gmail.com. Thank you, and God bless.